I'm going to introduce you now to Ian Morris, who is the co-founder and CEO of one of our fabulous supporters, Secrutiny. The stage is all yours. And I paraphrase the title, but it's all about logs.
Okay, so our main business is primarily a cybersecurity specialist, and we go right from incident response all the way through to SOC as a service, or building SOCs for customers. And I guess from a technology controls perspective, our market presence is probably known mainly as the guys that are trying to look to leapfrog things. So we're really looking for the latest and greatest technologies that are coming from Silicon Valley. And logs is a pet subject, and it's a pet subject based on experience and from sitting in many environments asking about availability of logs, and then us trying to, more often than not, find our way out of the problem when we don't find, when there are no logs. So why don't logs end up off-site? So more often than not, we find that there are two very different views of logs, and there are the guys that have thought about this and are proactive, and what a great place to be. So when we turn up for an incident, we have access to logs, and hopefully going back over a longer period, so we can start to get a feel for what's happening. But some of the time we turn up for incidents, and they're rarer than unleaded petrol in most of the country at the moment, and frankly, it's a real challenge for us when we're in the middle of an incident. So why do you bother with logs? But basically it's two-factor. It's the forensic element of them, so when you need them for post-incident or during incident, to try and get an understanding of what really has been happening. And they are the only things that show you the truth rather than what you think has happened. But the bit that most people steer away from on the logs primarily is the rules part of them. So the logs are the information that allow you to make the decisions about what good and bad looks like. And most of the guys that have got some form of SIEM deployed will be working quite hard with those logs to be able to get some form of information around what really is happening, what looks like a problem, and what needs further investigation. If you've got a SOC, then there's a high probability you are going to have some form of log management. It's just about whether that is sufficient for what you might need as you start to go forward. So we'll hear these numbers banded around by pretty much every vendor. This is an IBM number, and they suggest that breaches are typically in organizations on average 256 days to identify them. In our experience, we certainly see that number starting with a 1, and average numbers for us, we're typically seeing about 150 days that that we can find evidence that breach has actually existed for. So on that basis, it does raise quite a number of questions. The first one being, why would you retain data for a shorter period than the average time it takes to identify? Because if you've got 90 days of logs, then you're not going to find evidence of something that happened 91 days ago. And if you can't get back to the beginning of the timeline, it's near on impossible to find the needle in the haystack, to then be able to look at what the blast radius looks like of an attack, so that you can start to see what the impact was and where the attack had actually led to around your environment. The other thing that we see every day is the emergence of new compromise and new indicators, and those indicators are released to make people aware of them, but also to allow them to be able to go backwards and try and find any evidence of that. So when a 0-day announcement comes out from an operating system vendor, or even one of the cybersecurity vendors, we're looking at something that's happened in the past or has been available for a period of time that somebody has just found. Now, if you don't have the logs to be able to retro hunt against, then again, you have no evidence as to whether there has been any breach based on that compromise itself. And compromises are found by hackers as well as by the good guys. So it is important that you've got the ability to be able to have this extended view and to have systems that automate some of these things, because the very nature of storing this telemetry is pretty complex and wide, and the volumes just explode. So in the bigger organizations, we see people trying to deal with petabytes of logs, and we see people doing searches in their environments where they would start the search and go home and would hope that the answer is there the following morning when they log back on or return to work. So again, I think that's starting to show the type of infrastructure that you need to be able to do this in a very grown-up way. And the other question is what we see with this is the real route to getting some form of control over this is to get as much data as you possibly can. So everybody knows that if you go and speak to data scientists who are looking for abnormal behaviors in things, or a lot of the new security platforms that you see that talk about user behavior, the more data you can get into your log environment, the better chance you've got of being able to find anything that doesn't look normal that needs some form of investigation. So are your logs there to keep you safe, or do you just keep them safe? And again, we see very different behavior here. We see people that have started the log journey, and they recognize that they need them for some form of incident or event, so that they can go back. And bearing in mind this, this isn't just about security logs. This is also about performance logs, so that people can start to get their heads around, issues with systems. But a lot of people have started to go through the process of keeping the logs safe, but not actually using the logs proactively. And they are absolutely the telemetry that's telling you what's going on, and they will be there for a rainy day, but ultimately you want them there so that you can start to determine things that are happening in your environment that may just need performance monitoring, may need tweaks, may actually be incidents, but more than anything, you do need to be reviewing what they're telling you. So at Secrutiny, we try to preach system of record, and to us, it's the chain of custody, which allows our customers to collect as much data as possible and to be able to use that in a forensically sound way, to know that this is the system of truth for us. So in an incident, we can just literally go back and start to get a view of all of this information, and start to build timelines as what's actually happened. So in terms of some of the decisions and some of the conversations that we have with people, we try to ask people, to think through a list of questions, really, to get in their own head to work out what their intent is and what they think is sound. A lot of people were hosting their own data centers, and whilst it's a very sound route to doing it, if you've got very strong infrastructure, we are seeing a move much more to the cloud now because of some of the ransomware attacks. So sadly, the threat actors aren't silly, and they're starting to realize that this data is important in the event of an incident. So we're starting to actually see that some of the on-prem stuff sadly is getting trashed or encrypted as well. And again, the other big conversation here is around what is the data retention period. So this is all about how far you can go back, whether it's hunting, whether it's searching, whether it's proving. And again, it's a decision which is time versus cost, typically. And most of and certainly the cloud providers, you are going to see an extended bill if you want to push out the times that you want to hold this information for. The other area here is, and this is pretty much based on whether people are saving logs because they think they might need them in the future, or whether they're using them on a daily or minute by minute basis. And pretty much, if you're using the logs in a proactive way, you are going to want them searchable, and you'll want them searchable in a very timely way. And then accessibility, reliability are the other two things. Again, we see far too often that the logging system, because it sits on the side of people's infrastructure, often hasn't been tested, and isn't accessible to people as they need it when they start to work through some form of incident. So it is all about how quickly you can do these things. And our view is it's a serious subject. So we talk a lot about SOC as a something, and in our view, if you are going to have some form of SOC, everything is going to be based around your ability to get as much data into a format that you can use. And once you've done that, you've got the chance of being able to track an incident, being able to see what happened and when it happened and where it went. But more importantly, you've got the chance to be able to constantly be using this data to improve your own posture and position as an organization. So, bit of a summary really, and these are the questions that we all see in the news. And how often do we hear about a breach and the public comment from that organization is all about, we've thoroughly investigated it. Threat hunting, we've it's a core function of what we do. So there's no evidence of customer data loss. Critical systems, they've never been breached, and we know that this data has not been touched. And the question that we often have with a lot of our customers is, do we believe when we hear public breaches whether these people are talking from a point of view of integrity, because they have all of the data to evidence this, or whether it's just the PR statement? We all see these drips of companies saying they've had a breach, and then they go on to say that there's been that no data was touched, and then a few days later they admit that perhaps a little bit of the data was touched, and then there's a darknet leak, and suddenly we see the evidence of the real data that's been leaked. And a lot of this in our view is because a lot of the organizations don't have the ability to look at their data set, understand everything that's happened in this absolute forensic system of record, and be able to use that to know that when they stand up and they say no data loss has happened, that is very, very genuine. So it's a very serious subject. It's something we've been working on for a long time. We believe we've come up with a lot of the answers to be able to, in some ways, leapfrog the market to not doing things the old way. So to do things with absolute affordability and with complete and utter scale. And, this is really us talking from our experience of seeing things, done very well in some companies. Some companies are absolutely superb at this. And we would just like to see everybody else get to this level, because once you get here, then you've completely changed your posture in terms of your cybersecurity. So that's all I've got to say. We're not going to labour anything. Any questions anybody would like to ask?
Ian, thank you, sir. I was making notes all the way through. I think you summed it up beautifully at the end, where you said that, I mean, I'll translate it. There has to be a different way of doing it. You talked about you're trying to find that different way. You're applying different methods and schemes and ideas. But do you know what? There has to be a different way, because what we're doing at the moment is failing. And I don't know, I'm going to throw this out there, but the two issues that I've always found, again, you summed it up beautifully at the end there, are affordability and scale. And I'll add a third one to that one, which is access. I've always felt that, you know, you can have so many logs, you can have every single log that you like, but at the end of it all, you still have to analyze them and search them and use them. So, you know, access to those logs and getting from it what you want to know is key as well. I'm going to throw a question back to you, if I may, and please, audience, do join in with anything that you've got. But how does accountability and the awful word compliance fit into all this? You know, there is a duty of care that says that you should keep track of what your systems are doing. But how does that, can we use accountability and compliance as a lever, or is it really just one of those awful circumstances where accountability and compliance just become a tick in the box exercise? Do you understand the question?
I do, and I think that's, you know, that's a very, very serious issue in terms of, I think once you're starting to focus this based on compliance, there's a certain element of you're suddenly beaten, because you're doing everything based on what the compliance book says rather than the sense and sensibility. And if you start to drive yourself based on what you have to do to tick boxes, then, you know, we all know what happens when you come to look at that, because you'll always be missing the data that you most need. So I think sense and sensibility, with a view to saying, to having this view that says we should always have everything we can get. So actually our challenge is more about how can there not be blockers that exist today which stop us? And the things that stop us are always cost and accessibility. And they stop us because we say, well, you know, we don't want any more of that for any longer than that period because of the cost aspect of it. And then when we do go to use it, we go, oh, well, it didn't really quite work the way we thought. So actually, perhaps we'll stop doing it. So, you know, our view is get as many logs as you can and get them into a place where you can access them, or your service providers can access them when they need to, and do it in, you know, with some form of sense that says, what would we, how far would we typically want to go back? And in our view is that's a 12-month program. You know, if you can get back 12 months and see what happened a year ago, then based on everything we see, you know, you're going to be 99% better than everybody else for a start. And, you know, the chances of, you know, the compliance methodology and, you know, certain organizations of, you've got to evidence things, you know, that for the last 7 years and things like that. I think from a log perspective, if you can get back a year, you're in a pretty good place.
That was going to be one of my questions, actually. You jumped on there, and longevity and continuity. 12 months, so you can essentially start writing over the tapes after 12 months, you reckon?
Yeah, typically. I mean, there'll be a few industries that might want to go longer. Certainly the motor industry is one of those at the moment as we start to drive towards the connected car. So it's an area we've been working on quite a lot, and some of that data again will be partly compliance driven, but it will also be perhaps performance driven. So, you know, if you've got the data set that for cars perhaps from 10 years ago, then you're going to be able to see some things going on that will help your development as you move forward.
We had a great discussion last week on webinar. There was yourself, Jaguar Land Rover, Google, and the theme, and there was another organization, my head's gone. But the theme there was the SOC and the role of the SOC, and the importance of having a centralized function which draws all this together. I'd really like the audience to come back on this one as well. How does the SOC affect this? Is this a primary purpose of the SOC? Is it a byproduct of the SOC? Is it a reason to have a SOC?
Well, I think again, you know, one of the drivers to this, and one of the things we were talking about last week was the what is the job of the SOC? And you know, I think that there was a fundamental shift of where people had previously felt that the security operations center did everything security, and you know, made the rules, and you know, and policed the rules. Whereas I think there's been a shift now to people, you know, believe that the SOC is your emergency response, and if it's just looking at what doesn't look right and what looks to have gone wrong, and on that basis, you know, that the SOC will spend all of their time pretty much looking at logs, because it's the only sense of, you know, source of truth that they've actually got.
Has anybody out there got a view on that? Joseph, can you unshare us so that we can see our Ian more clearly? But has anybody else out there got any views on where they operate their data gathering, log gathering function, and how effective that is? We need some feedback here, folks. In terms of the SOC, we also talked last week about outsourcing versus in-house, Ian. And I just wondered whether, as with all things security, it's very sensitive. Do you outsource your security function? And do you outsource this log management thing? Or is it one of those things where you must keep it in-house? I don't know. That was one I was left questioning at the end of last week's session.
I think it's a scale thing. I think once you've, you know, trying to run a security operations center as a, you know, as a mid-sized business is quite an expensive exercise. And, you know, we would find that, you know, in that mid-market up to sort of 5,000 users, a lot of people prefer to outsource. And I think you'll find that even once you start to step into the much larger organizations, you're seeing these guys from a log perspective start to outsource that into the big cloud providers anyway. And they're doing that purely for the scale. If you're looking at petabytes, you know, as much as it's relatively easy to build data stores for that volume, the searchability of that data is, you know, is suddenly under a lot of pressure as you're trying to do these things quickly. And, you know, when you go into an incident, you're often in a scenario as well where many of your systems have potentially been taken offline. You've shut access to data centers as you start to get some form of control over what's happening. And suddenly you sort of snooker yourself because you've cut access to your own logs. So, you know, there's an element of, as long as you've got a very secure method of gaining access to them, having these types of things in the cloud make a lot more sense these days.
I've got a hand raise from Elaine Carlisle. Is that a point you'd like to make, Elaine, or is it just an accidental hand raise? It does happen. Perhaps you could let us know. I've got a question here from Leon, when I can find it. Chat, here we are. He says, can your system, I don't know what he means by system there, but is it normal? Can we connect various diverse log sources, and which ones? And then normalize them, analyze interdependencies, find hidden correlation amongst events. Very interesting question. Can we bring in different sources of data and merge them into trends and patterns?
Without a doubt. And you know, if you're building your log sources and your systems in the right way, you're trying to work out the value of the data you've got. And if you think about the big data buzz of probably 10 years ago, which doesn't tend to get referred to as much anymore, but people are still mining data and they're trying to work out what they don't know. And the job of a data scientist is to tell us something we don't know about the data we've got. And I think the more information you can get in a centralized place, and the more questions you can ask of that data, then you will actually bring value to the business based on performance, behavior, whatever it is, by analyzing that information rather than viewing it as just this massive overhead to the business all the time.
Elaine, you have a point you'd like to raise. Could you say hello and introduce yourself, and then ask your question? Are you there, Elaine? I feel like Jeremy Kyle here. I am, but on mute. Okay. Can you unmute? Joseph, can you help here, sir?
Yep, Elaine, you should be able to talk now if your microphone's working. I can see that it's unmuted my end. I'm not sure what's going on, I'm afraid.
Okay. Can you see if you can work on that one for a second, Joseph? Ian, I'm going to come back to another point which puzzled me last week as well. Is there any sensitivity to logs at all? Are there any issues that you've come across where the data itself, and especially once it's been analyzed, becomes sensitive in its own right?
Well, I mean, logs will, from various different systems will absolutely contain data that, may deem to be sensitive from a sort of GDPR perspective. And again, you see various different views on whether people's IP addresses or their email addresses, whether they are classed as sensitive information or not. I mean, ultimately, we're in a world where if we don't have this information, it's a hell of a lot worse than having the argument over what's sensitive and what isn't sensitive. The reality of it is this data should only be available to people that are, doing the role that they're doing, and to people that need to have access to do it. In the same breath, it's not too dissimilar to admin access rights on systems that we know can pretty much get to the crown jewels of anything if they need to. And again, it's another subject that's quite close to our heart in terms of, we use the phrase frequently, it's a privilege to have no privilege. And if you are a privileged user, you should be using that information or those credentials only when you need them, not all the time, because otherwise something is going to happen at some stage using your admin credentials, which means that you've been the cause of the breach. So, logs.
It's always useful to remind people that they have privilege and it becomes abused, then it's them that's going to hold the bloody can.
Right, and logs no different. They are very, very sensitive information because they tell you everything that happened. And at the end of the day, you'd only want people having access to that need to have access to it. And you would only be looking in there because something had raised a flag to tell you to look in there. You are not going to be able to have people scrolling through logs as a nature of their job, because they're probably not going to stay very long because it's a pretty laborious task. So yeah, it's all got to be secure in the same way as you would expect the rest of your systems to be secure.
Yeah, I just throw that one out there because it's something that I consider a lot of people don't recognize the sensitivity of data once it has been gathered, and especially once it's been analyzed. It's just a bunch of logs, but it's not. It becomes aggregated and then sensitive by nature of the analysis that goes on around it.
Very much.
Joseph, are we through to Elaine yet?
Unfortunately not. We're
Oh
trying to
gosh,
figure
Elaine,
out
did you
what
want to
the
just,
problem.
perhaps, is there something you can type? And I'm first is looking at our, right, here we go. What's her issue? I'm in the process of looking at our way forward for SIMSOC. So looking to have a SIM that is owned by my organization to collect, harvest, event, and log information from all our suppliers, so they are in one repository that they own, and then buy in SOC as a service. Can Ian provide a view on that approach? Ian, you can read that as well as I can.
So
I'm sorry we couldn't get hold of you, Elaine. That's a shame.
A really interesting point, and one that I think it is very much based around our beliefs in this system of record. The system of record is the organization's data, and even though an outsourced SOC is going to need to have access to that to be able to process rules against logs, to be able to determine bad or incident or issues, absolutely 100% that the company that owns that data should have control of it. And even if they are engaged with an outsourced SOC, they should be able to leave that organization with their own data and take it with them. So yes, I would be a very, very large advocate of that. And anybody that said, well, you know, the data that we have ingested for you, we cannot hand you the keys to, and you can't take that away, that would very much concern me.
Ian, is there anything else you want to wrap up with? I don't know whether or not there's an issue here about the way ahead, the future that you see it, anything that you particularly identify as challenges and solutions for the next level?
No, I think it's just a subject matter that if it's not formed part of a cyber strategy, sadly we are seeing more and more incidents every day, and it's the place you need to get to. An incident without logs is just an open checkbook, because the time it takes to try and identify what's happened is just the complete and utter unknown. So yeah,
this is an absolute classic, really dull and boring topic, which is absolutely fundamental to what we do. It's up there with cyber hygiene and all the other things that we're all far too busy to really give it the full attention it deserves.